the liturgy is going to connect us to part of the topic that we're going to talk about in the Roman study, which is a Sabbath versus Sunday topic out of Romans 14, verses 5 and 6. So let's look at a few Sabbath passages. Some of these are my favorite, and many of them are familiar to those of you who are in the know, particularly those of you who are in Messianic circles. And as I mentioned, the live studies takes place each week, and I record the video and then I upload it, but you don't get to interact with me unless, and I forgot to plug this earlier, unless you're tuning in to the live study with me live at the time that I'm doing recording. Then after the recording, after I'm done and I shut off the camera, then via Skype, me and whoever the live students are there in the class, we stick around and we have all kinds of interesting chat and discussion, right? So if that's what you'd like to do, you interact with the other students, with me and everyone else, and we can go back and forth, that's the place to do it. So join us live each week. That's exclusive to the live chat. It does not get recorded. It does not get uploaded anywhere. You're not going to be able to later on go on to see in the YouTube on the side bar, running on the right-hand side, all the chat that everyone did. None of that gets captured in my version. And if you want to chat with us, join us live each week. All right, let's take a look at the liturgy. This first passage is out of Genesis chapter 2, and it's the concluding part of the opening that most of us are familiar with, where God creates all of the heavens and the earth, and then Moses starts writing some of the particulars, and he gives some kind of brief summary. And so in Genesis chapter 2, I'm just going to read maybe just first 3 verses, because it talks about how that he brings in the Sabbath day as the kind of the crown on top of his creation, on top of creating anything. Let's just read this. So I've got ESV pulled up on the left side of the screen here, and I've got Masoretic Hebrew pulled up over on the right side of the screen. So let's just start right over there. This is ESV, Genesis 2:1. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. Verse 2 says, and on the seventh day God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. And then verse 3 says, so God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all his work that he had done in creation. Let's turn over to the Hebrew right here. Starting in verse 1, it says, Vaychulu hashamayim v'ha'aretz vaychol tzva'am. Verse 2 says, Chol Elohim bayom hashvi'i melakto asher asa vayishbot bayom hashvi'i makom melakto asher asa. And verse 3 says, Vayivarech Elohim et yom hashvi'i vayikadesh oto ki vo shavat makom melakto asher bara Elohim la'asot. And that's the first part from the Torah section of your Bible, the first 5 books. Let's turn to another passage out of the Torah. This is a more familiar passage, especially if you've attended a Messianic congregation before. In fact, this particular set of passages has been put to music. Exodus 31, verses 16 and 17. The latter half of this chapter deals with the Sabbath and about the death penalty attached to it. And I don't want to read the parts about the death penalty because that's kind of grim. We just want to read the part where God tells us that the Sabbath is something that commemorates the creation. And so starting in verse 16, God reminds us through the pen of Moshe. Verse 16 says of Exodus 31, therefore, is that where I want to start? Yeah. Therefore, the people of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, observing the Sabbath throughout their generations as a covenant forever. Wow, when did the Sabbath come to an end? Yeah, exactly. The silence speaks volumes. Okay, verse 17. It is a sign forever between me and the people of Israel that in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. And so notice that in Exodus 31, that it's a sign of God's creatorship. We're going to find out later on earlier in Exodus chapter 20, when we're giving the 10 Commandments, it also commemorates the creation of the world. But when we turn to Deuteronomy chapter 5, I believe it is, it commemorates something differently. We'll look at that maybe in a bit later on. Let's turn over to the Hebrew on the right side of the screen. Starting at verse 16, again, this has been put to music. The Hebrew says, Vashamru v'nei Yisrael et hashabat la'asot et hashabat l'dorotam brit olam. Verse 17 says, Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael ut hi le'olam. There's the sign forever. Ut hi le'olam, a forever sign. A sign forever. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz u'vayom hashvi'i shavat vayinafash. So this is a sign that God says between me and Israel. It's a wedding ring, right? Just like a wedding ring is a sign of the covenant that a husband and a bride have with one another. The rings are the sign of that covenant. The Sabbath itself becomes a sign of the covenant between God and Israel. So I think that's important. And as I mentioned, when we get to Romans 14, maybe we'll look at some of the other passages, or maybe we'll look at them a little later on tonight. Let's turn now to Romans 14. This is going to tie us into the Romans 14 discussion as well. And this is the liturgy that's tied directly to the study. And we read this last week. We'll read it again. We'll read it again as weeks go by. Eventually, we're going to end up reading all of Romans 14 in the Hebrew, in the English and in the Greek. But for now, we're just taking it a chunk at a time. So Romans 14, we'll read 1 through 6 again, just like I read last week. So let me not belay the point. Starting over here, verse 1, Romans 14, ESV, Paul says, As for the one who is weak in faith, welcome him, but not to quarrel over opinions. Verse 2, one person believes he may eat anything, while the weak person eats only vegetables. Verse 3, let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains, and let not the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats, for God has welcomed him. Verse 4, who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? It is before his own master that he stands or falls, and he will be upheld, for the Lord is able to make him stand. Verse 5, one person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. That's what we're going to be talking about tonight, verse 5 and 6. And then verse 6, the one who observes the day observes it in honor of the Lord. The one who eats in honor of the Lord, since he gives thanks to God, while the one who abstains in honor of the Lord and gives thanks to God. And we're going to ask the question, like we asked already, are these Sabbath verses any day verses? Is Paul saying, pick a day? It doesn't matter which day you pick. Put it up to a vote if you'd like. Whatever your congregation does, I'm on board with that, Paul says. Pick a day, it doesn't really matter. In other words, is Paul really kind of uprooting what God already said about the Sabbath earlier on that we read in Exodus? Is Paul saying, God established the seventh day as a Sabbath, and that's his holy day. But now that we're in the New Testament era and things are changing, really it doesn't matter which day you worship on. Every day is holy. All days are set apart. All days are special. Or only one day can be special, but it doesn't have to be the seventh day. You can just pick which day. It can be Sunday, it can be Wednesday, it can be Friday. Whatever day, it's up to you. Is that what Paul's telling us? And does it matter anymore? Those are the questions we're going to be kind of looking at. All right, non-judgmentally, of course. Let's go back up and read the Greek, starting over here on the side of my screen. Verse 1 says, Tan de astenunta te piste pras lambaneste me eis dia Christes dia legismon. Verse 2 says, Hos min pistue fagen panta ha de astenun la canta estie. Verse 3 says, Ha estion tan me estianta me exuteneto. Ha de me estion tan estianta me crineto ha theas garer autan pras labito. Verse 4 says, Su tis e ha crinon alatrion oikatin to idio curio steke e pipte stathesate de dunate garer ha curias stasai autan. Verse 5 says, Has min gar crine himeron par himeron has de crine pasan himeron hekastos into idio noi pleuriforesto. And then verse 6 says, Ha phronon tain himeron curio phrone kai ha me phronon tain himeron curio u phrone ha estion curio estie euchariste gar to theo kai ha me estion curio uk estie kai euchariste to theo. And that'll be the Greek for tonight. real quick, I do want to look at those other passages let's turn to Exodus, this is real quick. In Exodus chapter 20, I mentioned that the Sabbath is a sign of God's creatorship, and we see that God created the heavens and the earth in Genesis, and then Moshe summarizes everything there, and then in Exodus 31, God tells Israel to remember the Sabbath day because it's a sign of his creatorship. But in Exodus chapter 20, starting in verse 8, God says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And then he talks about how that, in verse 11, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and the earth, the sea and all that's in them. God rested from the seventh day. So we have a mark of God's creatorship again in recognizing the Sabbath day. So God tells Israel, keep the Sabbath, and in doing so, you are demonstrating that I am the creator. The Sabbath is a reminder of my creatorship, of my authority as creator, and that I'm the one who created everything. And we're going to see how this plays into Colossians that we're going to look at a little later on in the Shema study about how God is the creator. And that's why I'm emphasizing it now. So Sabbath is a sign of God's creatorship in Exodus 20 and in the later on in Exodus 31 when God tells Israel to remember the Sabbath because I created everything. But notice, let me turn for you to Deuteronomy chapter 5, which is the other reading of the 10 words, right? It's the second version that we see. And so when we look at Deuteronomy chapter 5 and scroll down, let's see, starting in verse 12, God says, observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy as the Lord commanded you. So again, we have the similar verbiage from Exodus. This is a repeat from Moshe's perspective, right? And then he goes down to some of the same things about 6 days, blah, 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 blah. But notice in verse 15 of Deuteronomy chapter 5, this time Moshe says, you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Did you notice anything different? In Deuteronomy, Moshe is tying the memorial of the Sabbath to our deliverance from Egypt. He doesn't say anything about God creating the heavens and the earth in verse 15 there. Isn't that interesting? It's not just an omission. So I think what Moshe is doing is he's giving us two very important aspects to the Sabbath. It is primarily a sign of God's creatorship, but it also is a sign that God is our deliverer. And this goes a long way in teaching us the fact that Yeshua is the Lord of the Sabbath, and that it is only in Messiah that we can find true freedom from sin, which is typified in the Bible by the slavery in Egypt. So Yeshua is the Lord of the Sabbath. He's the chain breaker. He's the one that sets us free. And so when we celebrate the Sabbath, we're not only reminded that God created all things, but we're also reminded that Yeshua is our Sabbath rest, and that He's the one that sets us free. Amen? Amen. Okay, I think that goes a long way.